everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is David Edgar, and as always, I am your host. And because there's quite a lot to talk about in the world of Rangers this week, I have broken the emergency glass and reached for two of my very favourite podcasters. First of all, the wonderful Mr. Martyn Ramsey.
Good to be here, David. Always here on the quiet weeks.
Yes, of course. You know that you don't get wheeled out unless...
No.
There's things on fire, basically. So good to have you on board. And if Martin's here, that means it's an important week. If it's an important week, that means it's Andy McGowan. Hello, Andy.
Hello, David. We're like international rescue. They folk that get flown into earthquakes and stuff like that. We get flown in for this.
Yeah, Red Adair. That's
Red Adair.
Like, yeah, brought in when the situation isn't good. And of course, Flames were a theme of the weekend, with Rangers going down to a meek 2-0 defeat versus St Mirren. That was the end for manager Philippe Clemont. I think most of us would have agreed he was on death row ever since the Queen's Park game, but this hastened his departure. He was shown the door on Sunday night. Rangers on Monday afternoon announced an interim management team until the end of the season, with Barry Ferguson as head coach. He will be joined by the already in situ Isman Sharai, but also be joined by Alan McGregor, Billy Dodds and Neil McCann to make up the coaching team from now until the end of the season. Stefan van der Heyden and Colin Stewart and Alex Ray showing the door alongside Philippe Clemont. So I don't really know where to start. So much has happened over the last 48 hours. First things first, Martin, the game at the weekend, over and above the performance, which, according to the Rangers statement, was part of the reason for his dismissal, not merely the result, but the performance. They said the response to the Queen's Park game having been what it was, that they decided the time was right to move. Rangers were abysmal. I'll talk about it in a wee bit more detail with Andy in a minute. Rangers were really bad at the weekend. There was just nothing there. It was disjointed. It was a mess. It was just bad. And unfortunately, over the last few years, we've seen enough managers at the end of their spell to recognise when it has hit us. And the press conference afterwards, I said on our shows on Saturday, he looked like he knew. He looked like a man who realised his time was up. It was slightly different to even after the likes of Queen's Park. There was no fight in him, no defending his record, nothing like that, just almost a kind of acceptance of it. What are your thoughts on it? And then obviously we'll move on later to the appointments. But first of all, Philippe Clemont, unfortunate, well-deserved. What do you think?
Full disclosure, I wasn't at the game on Saturday. I was away for the weekend, so I haven't seen it. And to borrow slightly from Lyndon Baines Johnson, I shall not seek it out to watch. I don't believe it was a particularly enjoyable watch. Clearly the board kind of hoped that there would be some kind of reaction to Queen's Park, and we just stumble on, mainly in Europe obviously, that we get a reaction and maybe just kind of stumble on to the end of the season where we could clear the decks. That made it impossible. Dave, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but he seemed to say that thing that managers always say when they know it's over, that basically you have to ask the board, where he didn't really say that against Queen's Park, because I was at the Queen's Park game on press with you, and he was very nope, nothing will be changing. And
full backing, yes, I've spoken to them. Yeah, no, there was none of that. And when he was asked about his position, he did say, and I quote, that's not for me to decide, that's up to the board.
Yeah, so that's we know that, right? That's manager speak for I've got a big wooden or cardboard box in my office, and I'm just about to be filling it up with all my stuff. Unlucky, deserved. I mean, it is deserved. Rangers managers cannot survive the two Ibrox results that we've seen. We've spoke before, this kind of cumulative humiliation. It's off the back of other failures, and so the embarrassments, the shocking results, just become so much bigger. So much more impactful. There was no way he was going to ride that out. There seems to be a kind of either or, mutually exclusive conversation going on out there in Rangers Twitter or boards or buses or whatever, about whether there are deeper problems or it's entirely down to him. Both can be very true. It isn't just a failure of the manager. Rangers have deep structural problems. They have deep problems within our squad. And for anyone hoping to see a more energetic, high pressing, just quicker Rangers side with what looks like the slowest Rangers squad I can remember seeing, they may be disappointed, but he has not managed those resources well enough, and that's why he's out of a job. He could have fought a better game, a smarter game. He could have stayed on lines that he was on this time last year. Jesus, we're going to come on it this week, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
And I've said it on various shows before. I drove home that night, and I get a hard time for being quite pessimistic and negative towards our chances of success in recent years. That's not exactly been ill-placed, but I drove home totally convinced Rangers were going to win the title, that things had changed round, that this guy had come in and, eight behind, 2 ahead, unheard of kind of, point swing with the Cup and the Europa group being won, and this is just remarkable. And then he stopped doing what he'd been doing. I think that Rangers team had conceded something like 6 goals in his first 12 games or something like that. And it was quite sturdy. Okay, that's what managers do when they come in mid-season. They stop, they put the fire out. And it was as if those 2 games, the 5-0 against Hearts, where Rangers were absolutely superb, and then that gutsy, full of character, come from behind at Rugby Park, the graveyard of Rangers titles campaigns in the past, and you think, right, we've seen the 2 sides of a team that you kind of need to see, and he changed things up, took out one of the holding midfielders, left Lundstrom to do everything on his own, which he absolutely could not do, lost to Motherwell, and then even though we beat Hibs a couple of weeks later, after international duty, whenever it was very, very obvious that we weren't going to win the title after being so sure, because there was just these huge holes everywhere. That was on him. Whether Rangers would have run out of steam by the end, possibly, but it would not have limped to the kind of farcical and, let's be honest, well-trodden path that it did. So that is on him. Some of his decisions this season are clearly on him. His inability to get into the players' heads outside of those first few months is absolutely partly on him. The flatness of the summer that just didn't happen probably isn't on him.
No.
And Rangers did not. It didn't exist. Rangers, it just didn't seem like it was as if we'd left Hampden and we were straight on the bus to Tynecastle. It was as if the summer, restart just did not take place. And again, this kind of farcical, panicked end to the window, 3 million in a player who doesn't want to be here, couldn't pick us out on a map probably beforehand. These kind of things clearly aren't. And the bigger problems, the things that we can control but aren't as a club, the things that are outside of our control and probably do need to change for whatever we do to make any sense or have any relevance, these aren't. But where he's lost is not in a tight title race, in a tight cup final necessarily. It's we know why. We know why today's happened.
Andy, he, as Martin said, he got off to that brilliant start, and it's hard to make a judgment in that period because we've all seen a new manager bounce. That's why the cliche exists. But it did go on for the first 6 months or so. And then when the wheels came off, they came off spectacularly and never got back on. And Martin mentioned the Motherwell defeat, but I think the more painful week was to follow when Rangers lost at Dingwall. And it was the first time the manager got criticism because it was quite clear Rangers needed to change at half-time that day, didn't, and found ourselves 3-1 down before he made substitutions in the second half when it was too late. And his reaction after that, and more so after the game midweek when we went to Dundee, put in a frightened, tepid performance, drew 0-0, and the manager said we had bounced back well. That then became a pattern, I think, for the rest of his time at Rangers, where the manager would say one thing, his players quite often in a post-match interview would say another. That night it was Dujon Sterling famously who said we'd been shit, and the manager pulled him up about it in the press conference a couple of days later. I think that from then, any sort of relationship he built up in those few months went, because we would sit after a match, even as recently as Queen's Park, and he's talking about shots on goal and whatnot, and it just led you to eventually believe he just doesn't get this. He just doesn't get what this club is. And if you don't, then it's very, very difficult. In any role, if you don't understand the specificities of that particular role, you're going to struggle to hit your goals.
Yep, you lost the confidence of the supporters, lost the confidence of the players by looks at and end up. And, even if it's performative, you've still got to understand what the audience wants. And you're right, that Dundee game after the Dingwall debacle, and Dingwall was the first time I seen in his face bewilderment. If you remember, he was standing there at the touchline and he'd been very, very assured up until that point. But that second half of that game up in Dingwall, it was like he had no answer, and you could see it in his face. We've seen that a few times since. And, to then go to Dundee and kind of paint over the reality of what it was. We were walking out there in Dens Park that night. We knew the title was by, regardless of what happened, regardless of mathematically, we could still do it. We knew it was finished and we blew it. And he kind of came out with that positive aspect. And it was the wrong thing to do, because at that point, you lose all credibility. Even if you were to come out and say unacceptable, not quite that we're blowing it in that language, but to allude to that, at least you're going to be honest with the fans. And it was a theme throughout his time since then that there was too often where he was trying to explain away things that we were watching and saying, that's not right, that's not what I'm watching. So there was a credibility issue, which was not the case in his first few months, where he came in, breath of fresh air, a lot of new ideas, authoritative, and was getting a response. So the proof was in the pudding. Once that pudding went sour, then there was nothing really left. There was no substance at all. But you fast forward to now, and Martin's covered most of it. You can argue that there was things went against him. The cutting of the wage bill, undeniably, for any manager, no matter how good you are, has got to be a stick in the spokes. And I feel from in that regard. However, he was paid to manage. It wasn't too far away from the matter of facts when he took over that there was financial constraints to just get a bit tighter. And you had the Hampden debacle as well, which in a bit of a vacuum above him, with Bisgrove leaving and John Bennett coming in and trying to do his best as he could in trying circumstances. So there was a lot of things went against them. A lot of marginal decisions. You look back to the cup final with the penalty. I think he was unlucky with injuries. Although, when's that not been the case for any manager at Rangers?
And he kind of made a rod for his own back with injuries.
Yeah, well, he had a solution for us, and we're like, great.
By saying all of last season, I know why this is happening, I'm going to sort it, and then it didn't. And you're right, injuries happen, but it was him who had sort of, if you like, put the focus on it can be fixed.
Yeah.
And then when it wasn't, I think people held that against him as well. I'll stay with you, Andy, on this one for the game on Saturday. I don't think the players should get a pass on this one. I think we all understand the reality of football clubs is you can't sack the players, and I think we all know that this playing squad is badly assembled, lacks quality, lacks belief, lacks leadership, anything you want to say, it probably is accurate. As Martin says, one of the slowest Rangers teams I can remember, one of the smallest and least physically imposing Rangers team that I can remember also. And I don't really understand the thinking there, because I think that you need, in any league, power, pace. That's modern football now. You have to have these things. I know people will sometimes say, well, Manchester City aren't a big team. No, but they've got some of the best players in the world. That helps. When you don't, you have to kind of have the athleticism within the side. But that possibly wasn't entirely down to him. But you can tell when players have given up on playing for a manager. And Saturday was that. That Rangers team went out and just produced nothing, just 90 minutes of absolute nothingness. Of when they got the ball, they turned and looked for the safe option. They would pass it back the way. I watched the games back afterwards. I know you do as well. And the amount of times Rangers have a throw in and the automatic response is to wait a few seconds till the fullback jogs over to take it slowly. He then immediately turns and throws it 40, 50 yards back the way. It gets played between the centre backs and then inevitably ends up at the goalkeeper. And we can't do the thing of St Mirren, we're just sitting in two banks of four, because they pressed like hell. And when they did, Rangers panicked, and it would either end in a mistake from the keeper or one of the centre backs, or the ball just being launched, hopefully, up the field. And that to me is whatever he's telling them, because I don't imagine that's what he's telling them to do. They're not listening. And Saturday just had all the hallmarks, so much so that even the board noticed and took action, because to me that was just 11 random players going out there and going through the motions. And I thought the players were a disgrace at the weekend.
It was a disgusting performance, absolutely disgusting to see that for Rangers 11, regardless of the circumstances, whether it's, where the league's gone or not, but especially so given that, Celtic get beat that day, and I'm not saying, we go 10 points behind and start rubbing our hands, but there was a principle at stake there, and regardless of that, we should be winning, and it wasn't as if St Mirren came back and played 10 men behind the ball, right? So this low block that we often
they
talk
pressed
about.
like hell.
Aye, because they knew that we were there for the taking in that regard, and we played into their hands, and there's no patterns of play, and you persist with the kind of Diamandi and Raskin outnumbered. The game plan seems to be get to Cherny and see what happens. You've got Hadji, who's no a winger, playing as a winger. It was just a farce, right? And you're watching it, and games like that can happen, but you can recover them, because either you've got people on the part that recognise what needs to happen, and they'll have a wee tweak here or there, or they instruct somebody, or they give somebody a kick up the arse, whatever. You've also then got the influence for the side of the park or at half time. And what really, even back to Kilmarnock away, which was the first time I said, look, this is done, right? You were seeing no response. His inability to introduce variance at all has killed us time and again in games that we should be winning. You look to Motherwell there, and we managed to get back to 2 each with, I don't know, half an hour to go if you include an injury time. We should have won that game. You go back to Easter Road, same. We're cruising with so much time to go. We somehow fashion a draw at it. And then just the same as Queen's Park, and just the same as in Saturday versus St Mirren, nothing changes. And I'm not talking about rocket science where you need an A licence to work it out. But, even moving Cherny to the other side and allowing them to go outside and byline instead of this perennial, you're talking about the team passing backwards. The other thing that they've got now in their DNA that they can't shake is going inside, whether it's Jefte, whether it's Adji, whether it's Cherny, whether it's the fullbacks. Everybody turns inside, which I know there'll be some kind of tactical reason for it, and they'll be creating space elsewhere, but it's not working, and teams just sit and they're super comfortable because they don't need to change the way they're handling the game. Whereas if you change the dynamic, get to the byline, you've got players, all of a sudden defenders facing their own goals, and all sorts can happen. It was just too easy for these teams, and it was the same against Queen's Park. We keep firing balls into the 6-yard box, and their centre halves are handling it so easily. We do nothing to change it. You then compound it with the fact that a well-coached team might have something up their sleeve from a set piece, non-existent, right? But the power equation you're talking about, this physicality part, it's the thing that anybody that's listening to the podcast with me this season will have heard me talk about the power equation. We've got a squad which is, when you look at it, it's weak. The balance is too much to weak. Too many wee players, too many players that are too soft. Dessers, Cherny, right? That equation can be nudged up a wee bit when you've got like you add Suter and Dujon Sterling to that team, then we're a wee bit more capable of allowing our good players to do what they need to do. But on Saturday, we were totally physically dominated from the first minute to the last minute. That is unacceptable for a Rangers team. Anytime, no matter what standard that, the physicality and ability to stand up to physical pressure has to be a prerequisite if you want to be successful and you want to grind out games in the Scottish League. I'm not talking about stuff here that MD doesn't know, but the fact is we've managed to get ourselves in a position where we've got a squad that doesn't meet that criteria. Now, we can go back seasons and say, well, this is a cumulative recruitment issue. Probably is. But by the same token, he played Agaman deeper. Play him up front. Play him. Give those two centre halves a problem. Don't let them bounce, Dessers about like a ragdoll. There's so many things that were just wrong, and he would still be here at the end of the season if he'd won on Saturday's my take. I think that the board were convicted in letting them stay to the end of the season, ride it out, be the sponge for whatever comes in. But their hand was forced because you'd be bounced for Queen's Park to that, and there's no response. That was the killer.
You're absolutely right there. I agree with that. But this goes back to a frustration of mine about not learning. There comes a point with a manager where one more defeat and that's it, and everybody's just waiting for that. And players are human beings as well. It happened to Beale. It happened here again. That's why they should have sacked him after Queen's Park, because he was done. Queen's Park was too big a result. There was no way back. He was never coming back with the supporters. And it meant that unless he was to go to the end of the season undefeated, he was going to be emptied at some point. And that's why it should have been done. Now, it's came the next game, but it could have came, Wednesday night or the next home game or whatever, and the result would have been the same. And that's what frustrated me, because it's like, lads, we have an example of this recently. You don't need to look that far. And it's the same at every football club in the world, incidentally. There comes a point when a manager is done. Queen's Park was that moment. That's when action should have been taken. But
do you think the takeover
the all of Saturday?
Aye. Do you think the take? Because I agree with you, right? Yes. But I think that what we didn't know, the stuff we didn't know that was going on in the background, was having more of a bearing on what was going on than we probably ever could have possibly realised. And that I just think that takeover's changed the dynamic of every decision that would have been getting taken or considered at Ibrox for everything, including the manager's role.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and I know what you mean, Davey. We talked about this in other shows, that when a board get to that, says, well, it's the next one. Well, when you're in that situation, you might as well pull the trigger. I think that trigger would have been pulled in another season when that wasn't maybe hanging about. They were just desperate to just get to the end of the season. So am I, by the way, for the record, desperate to get to the end of the season, other than Europe, because it's just been an absolute write-off of a campaign. And then just genuinely start with a new broom and a fresh approach. I get the theory and I get the desire there, especially when you're kind of holding the fort potentially in a kind of transitional period. But football doesn't work like that. And yeah, as I said, I didn't see the game, but I bet I've seen that performance before at the end of Beale and the end of Gio.
Yeah.
It is a footballing culture. Does it matter who comes in the door in terms of players, because it's meet the new players, same as the old players, as far as I can see? There is a culture there that needs utterly transformed. But I think I said after Queen's Park, it was the kind of athletic, Hearts, so the week after Queen's Park, I think I said on Twitter that was, we won, but it was the athletic equivalent of someone shaking their mouse just to stay available on teams. It's players going through the motions, knowing the gig's up, and clearly that just developed into even more farcical consequences at the weekend. We've seen the same. Andy's disgusted. He shouldn't be surprised. It's the same culture that knows when the managers, they've seen on for another manager and they can just go through the motions.
Yeah. You and I do an English Premier League show on our Heart and Hand Patreon network. And not only have we seen it before with Bale, we've seen it this season with Sean Dyche at Everton. We've seen it with Lopetegui at West Ham. We've seen it with Gary O'Neill at Wolves. There comes a point when a manager's done. Everyone knows it. You're as well just taking a decision then. But, I do appreciate the takeover is going on in the background. But even so, I think you had to make the move. And
football in reality.
Football in reality, yes.
You're not coming back from it. Unless they get this bounce from Fenerbahce, possibly, and which has kind of happened, but it's just never happened for long enough, has it? With Europe this season.
They've won big in Europe this season and gone into the weekend. You think, right, here we go.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, been really bad. No, you're right. It's football gravity, and when you're caught in it, you're done. And that was the case for Clemont. So staying with you then, Martyn. Rangers announcing an interim team. And I think most of us, if you'd asked beforehand, would have said it will be an ex-player of sort, and there's loads of names put forward. Must admit, Barry Ferguson didn't occur to me, but he's the guy who's been selected. Interesting backroom staff for ex-Rangers players of varying popularity among the support, I think it would be fair to say. But also Issam Charai, who was appointed a few weeks ago, in there as well. It's quite an interesting story, this.
Interesting's a word. It's definitely a word. The assistant manager, I can only assume then, is there to get the best out of a man. Because given some of the talk about him, some of the noise about him, it would have made sense for him. If he's there as a footballing presence, it would have made sense just to give it to him to the end of the season.
Or is he perhaps to be Carlos Queiroz and, you're on the training pitch, you're the guy who's doing all that?
I mean, possibly. So it's a long-term thing.
And the other guys are more here. Like Barry Ferguson will be in charge of things like, selecting the team, yes, but motivation and
okay. So the Queiroz thing for sure, right? And especially if Rangers,
like Michael Beale in his first spell at Rangers when Gerrard was the manager, but it was Beale who did the training ground stuff. It could be, I suppose, that, and let Barry Ferguson deal with all the rest of being the Rangers head coach.
So, okay, so to go back the way, in a normal permanent structure, I totally get that. I guess my point would be, right, you're here. Could you do the job for the next 3 months? We just need to get to May. And, please do. If he's completely unsuited to that, or I've misread the whole dynamic, then fine. Which then does leave the club, usually, not just Rangers, but clubs do usually look around for some former heroes to come back and plug a gap, because who else would do that for 3 months? I mean, that's madness.
Let's not kid on, this doesn't happen abroad. This
of course it does. It happens everywhere.
Yeah, if you follow like Italian or Spanish football, it's quite regularly when a manager spends a club.
Even the lower leagues, it happens, right? But what normally happens is they look to former players who have at least a track record of management at a similar kind of level. And could you just do as a turn? Stuart McCall, for example. This is a conversation in a supporters bus on the way back somewhere after a few drinks as to who you would bring in. Where's Billy Dodds come from? Neil McCann, certainly a name that's been floated often as someone that could provide value in a kind of backroom capacity on a permanent basis, for sure. I can see that. Ferguson, it doesn't make any football sense. Fair enough if he was at the club and he was pulling up trees as a youth coach and you say, look, can you step up? That's, again, the norm. Or if he had pulled up trees in his real coaching career since retiring, and maybe just taking a bit of a break, he's on a bit of a hiatus, and say, look, we know you're taking a break, but could you help us out? Again, that makes perfect sense. Neither is true. So this seems like a bit of populism. I don't know how well judged that populism is right enough, but it just seems like getting as many bells through the door as possible, which again isn't abnormal, but they usually have something to back up taking that role. Otherwise, what other Rangers player could you just fish out and see if they wanted to do that? He's very visible. He has been. Got a big presence in the Scottish sport media, and outlets that maybe wouldn't lend themselves well to Rangers support over the years, has been ultra critical. So are we, but sometimes possibly with an agenda that we maybe haven't had in the past.
Well, speak for yourself. The whole reason I created this website was so that I'd be considered for jobs when they came up.
Exactly. So it's an interesting choice, but it might play a blinder. Who knows? But it certainly can't be based on any kind of footballing track record in that capacity. If we're able to regenerate, the midfielder, the teenage sensation under Advocat, and elements of his later spell, then I'm all for that machine. But yeah, I do not really see the obvious merit.
Andy, on this, then, is it a case of perhaps, let's get the vibes improved? It is only for 3 months. They maybe wanted to make clear it's not an appointment that is, even if they do well, is going to stay in the role. Highly unlikely anyway, given the takeover. They will want their own guy. That's usually the case. Even seen successful managers at clubs get punted after a takeover because they want their own guy, and that happens at a fair bit. So is it maybe a case of going, look, we're not going to win anything this year, realistically? I know there'll be some fans out there saying, well, we're still in the Europa League, but Christ, if Barry wins that, he doesn't deserve the job permanently, he deserves a frigging statue. But Is it a case of just saying, right, lads, go in, try to pick up the confidence among the players? The fans will identify with you because, Barry Ferguson, he is a Rangers fan through and through, great memories as a player, and just let's get through to the summer, win the league games. They don't mean an awful lot now, let's be honest, but just improve the mood so that when the takeover comes in the summer, everybody's in a good place to go and it doesn't have a negative effect on the summer as we saw last year.
Aye, this is still really important. I mean, it's only 3 months is nothing, right? 3 months is nothing in football, but for us, it's going to feel like a lifetime. And what happens in those 3 months, they matter. They do matter. As much as we'll use phrases like dead rubber and everything else. And, who knows what will happen with Fenerbahce. If that's the way it ends in Europe, then so be it. But it's about expectation beforehand. So I kind of chuckled when I looked at suggestions of who might be in the frame, and the appointment here, the headline appointment, by that I mean the actual interim manager, always had to be two things. They had to be acceptable to the fan base and they had to be disposable, and clearly disposable, because there was never going to be a situation where the guy comes in, does all right, and then you're like, you know what, we might actually keep him, because it happened in the past with Murray. There was moments we were so mental when we look back on it that we're like, well, you could maybe do this on a permanent basis. And with the takeover and everything else, that's never going to be a realistic situation. So there's an unspoken realism about the appointment of all. And Martyn, David, we've spoke about the need for figureheads at Rangers. Gerrard was a figurehead as opposed to an out-and-out coach. Souness was a figurehead as opposed to an out-and-out coach. So it might be that for this period in time, he is the face of the management, and you've actually got, Chirai, who's brought here for a reason, highly rated, who knows. Neil McCann, extremely popular with the fan base. Is he a good coach? Who knows, right? Because he was here and he was away at Dundee. And Billy Dodds, who is a bit of a left field appointment, but at least he's been in the trenches in real football any time recently, So, and McGregor, McGregor, I presume, will come in as a goalkeeping coach. So,
do you think, Andy?
I
presume McGregor will come in as a goalkeeper.
Well, he could come in. Do you know what he could come in? This? Do you know what he could come in as?
What?
The angriest man in a dressing room ever for kicking arse.
I think that goes without saying.
Right, but well, the reason I say that, and I'm not being funny, Colin Stewart was your set piece coach, wasn't
he? Yes.
Right. So do you think McGregor's going to be your set piece coach?
I would hope not.
Well, shut up, right? And while I'm at it, Martin, I heard you giggling there. I never called you a part-timer for missing Saturday, so...
Yeah, that's true.
Have mercy on me.
Oh, I don't give a fuck.
But I just think that it's popular enough to allow us to go into... there was people on my bus weren't going back until Clemont was gone, and they'll be quite... It's a populist... appointment. They'll go against Motherwell because Barry's here. We've got good memories. Regardless of what you think of him, he was a great captain for Rangers. And it might ruffle a few feathers in that dressing room. That dressing room is a nursery. They don't know.
Creche, yes.
They don't know the realities of being a Rangers team, and a few of them need to know that.
That's a really interesting point. I was going to bring this up to both of you. This idea that they'll go in and they'll kick arses, and I think we all want that because the players are letting us down regularly, and there's no connection at all between this Rangers team and the fans. There really isn't. Can you do that with modern players? The reason I ask this is Jose Mourinho, who of course has been looming large in Rangers' thoughts recently. I saw an interview with him last summer before he went to Fenerbahce, and he was lamenting modern footballers and saying, back when I first started, it was men I was dealing with, and you could look them in the eye. He said, now they've got their heads bowed, they've got their headphones on. If you say anything to them, they run straight to their agent. And also, is that a little bit disrespectful to the guys who are coming in to assume that that's all that they can do? Because, they all did play at high levels. I doubt very much that these were not playing for, effing and jeffing coaches. They were playing for guys who knew what they were doing. So, yeah, I'm just interested in that whole debate, because I think as fans it's easy to say that, but I do think that there's a bit more to it. And I think that the guys coming in will know there's a bit more to it.
We'll see. Fans want it because they want that as a proxy for them. Same
you
the
want them
way they
punished
want us.
for being bad.
They want us to act as a proxy for them by, not swearing at the manager, calling them whatever name they want managers to be called in press conferences and stuff. That's what they think football managers can do. And the notion that all this Rangers dressing room needs is to be shouted at is long gone. They don't have what it takes. We know that. It's not going to be shouted into existence. Rangers have made the right choice. Well, one of the right choices in the last 24 hours, clearly. But the squad is still a bigger issue for me, and it will continue to be until we act smarter and are able to act bigger in terms of money. So no, I don't think that's the case. I take some of Andy's point. Fans will respond to this. I'm fairly sure. And leadership, in terms of the figurehead of being Rangers manager, even if it's for 3 months or 3 years, Andy and I are on the same page there, I think, over the years. But that needs emotional intelligence. And I'm not sure that's in play here necessarily, but we'll see. The big tick for any interim staff coming in is that this Rangers squad are kind of entering the Goldilocks zone of their season, which is no pressure. Let's just have fun. We like Europe. Have a go at that. So they may well get a tune. You might get, kind of Ugo Ekiol type result at Parkhead maybe, and maybe get the better of Mourinho, and maybe come up short against Bilbao, but it's respectable and no embarrassments. So they could enjoy themselves, because this Rangers squad are brilliant at this time of the season. Didn't enjoy Saturday because Celtic lost, and I mean that doesn't really play into their absolute no pressure preferences. But they could get a few results. And you say, Andy, that there's going to be no question of this being extended. I would love to hope so. It's just the thing that Rangers needs more than anything else is just on 1st of June there will be a permanent manager, a new permanent manager, not in place at the moment, and it's a genuinely new start.
But there will probably be a new owner in place by then. So
of course, but if they do have this purple patch, which is conceivable given the reasons I mentioned, how these players react to the kind of end of season bounce games, you might get a lot of fans saying, "Oh, you know what? We'd be stupid to chase this out the door." I would bet the mortgage on it, actually.
I mean, listen, we both know if he wins every game from now at the end of the season, then people will be demanding that. But again, it's up then to the board to make the right decision. Who knows? He could go in and be fantastic, and maybe it is the right thing. We don't know at this stage. But I do think it's as clear an appointment that says it's 3 months as you can.
Yeah, well, hopefully, because I hope we're all of the opinion that the next manager needed to be in the summer. And we just needed someone who can hold that for. Maybe give everyone a wee boost, give the punters a boost, play that card. I've got no issue. Just get me to May, please, as soon as possible.
Yeah, to be honest, I wanted Clemont sacked at the turn of the year after the away performances. And even then, I would have put an interim in until the end of the season. Because
that's a harder appointment, Dave, isn't it? And we spoke about this because that then enters into a longer period of time where
could have won a cup or something. Yeah,
I
agree. But I think Martin's main point, which is a new manager starting in summer, is optimum, and we're in a position where we can actually look for optimum at the moment because of the off-field circumstances as well.
You would like to think that whoever the takeover is ahead. There's a party working ahead of the legalities of actually getting the shares bought in place. And there will be discussions about future state on a presumption of completion of the takeover. You would like to think that would be part of the game plan right now. Easier said than done. It depends who's going to be here and continuity of Patrick Stewart, chairman, and all sorts. So you would like to think that there's forward planning there with Coppin and whoever's going to be the sporting director. I keep saying it. You like to think that this mob are coming to the table with a plan if it's the 49ers, which I'm still not convinced is the main party, right? We've still not had the detail there of if it's their party or if it's just a partial interest they're going to hold. You like to think if it's them that they come to it with that degree of professionalism where they've got a thought process in place of here's things we want to do, we would like to do, and we can start the wheels getting in motion for that. Because time is of the essence, 1st of June's not that long away, as Martin's saying. If we could get somebody in for the windows, it'd be marvellous.
Yeah, I mean, I do get the impression that the people who are doing the takeover are professionals, and I'd be staggered if they weren't thinking about what they want it to look like for next year. So I'm not going to ask you for names of managers in the summer because there's a lot of managers out there, but maybe more for the type of manager that you want. And the reason I say that is certain ones have been mentioned, and one that was floated was Russell Martyn. And I am not saying Russell Martin's a bad manager. I'm saying that his style of football, which he sticks to religiously, is that slow possession-based football, 1,000 passes, that has not worked for us in Scotland because we don't have access to good enough players to play it fluently. My personal preference is just give me a coach that attacks, direct, fast football. The reason I say that is Rangers have been, at times over the last few seasons, an absolute chore to watch, Andy.
Yep. Funnily enough, and I don't like to get into the degrees of who was the worst, but I don't think Clemont's football was ever as bad as the last days of Gio, right? But that's hardly anything. That's not a consolation. I agree with you. I think when I was reading about Russell Martyn, I've watched these teams, it seemed a bit Warburton, right? And that was, if you think back to the first days of Warburton, it was really exciting, refreshing, something we hadn't seen before for a long, long time. And you would probably get that wee initial, oh, this is nice, playing for the back and possession and comfortable football. But what we do need is we want attacking football that penetrates, and we need physicality to go with that power. And we need to be good to watch. And you're only good to watch if you're winning. And, the bottom line for me is there's only one kind of football that's acceptable, it's winning football. And I don't really care how we get to that point, right? And if you're born Martin, Davey, we're sons of Souness and sons of William, sons of Walter.
Exactly.
We doing slipper, that and all right. But we watched football that was turgid, but it was winning football, and that's acceptable to a point, right? So I want a pragmatic manager, because it's not always going to be easy, and I want to see solutions. See if we become long throw specialists, couldn't give a shit as long as we're getting results. Because see if we had long throws and a couple of set pieces, a bit of power in the box, you might not have been beaten at Queen's Park, you might not have been beaten Saturday, even though you're playing absolutely terrible football. Because that's football, and there was things like that with the inches were getting missed by Clemont, and I just want a pragmatic attacking manager. Is that too much to ask?
Martin?
I would agree with the chore point, Davey. It really has been. Where I would come back is that I have seen similar, if not worse, games under Beale, Gio, Gerrard at times. So I don't think it's anywhere near.
No, I did see the last few years.
Yeah,
and he's only been here 18 months, so it was incorporating those ranges.
But it's the same. It's the same reverting to that thing that we seem to do it just in general as a club. I would love an attacking manager. I would love to see pace. You need pacey players. I go back to my point. This is such a turgid Rangers team. Even the pacier players are now knackered because at the end of the road. So if you are bringing in that kind of Brentford thing, I'll need to see new players in the summer for that to work, in my opinion. So that I need a manager that works with the complement that he has available. But overall, pragmatism, yep, okay, sign me up for that. But we probably can't get the squad we need, because we can't afford the squad we need, in my opinion. I'd love to be wrong. If we can just be a lot smarter, and if that's all it is, great. But what we do need is belief, because we're behind the eight ball. We know the situation we're in. You need a manager that's going to make players feel 8 foot tall and play above themselves, individually and as a collective group. How they do that without those players in their image on the pitch, again, is another worry of mine. But that's kind of the manager. I think Rangers, in the position we're in at the moment, needs to see a genuine, psychologist, snake charmer of a manager, call it what you want, but can, not just for a bump of a month or two, but can get them to genuinely think and believe that they can do this, they can do that, because it's going to need that kind of guy to punch up, because that's kind of where we are overall. I know we're punching down in the opposition, but that's not how league football works, and I'm getting very, very frustrated at that kind of simplistic attitude to our woes. Rangers weren't beaten by St Mirren, they're beaten by Rangers, they're beaten by the pressures, just the general issues around playing for this football club that are well worn. So a manager's going to get right into the heads, I think would be the priority. And if we have the players who can cope with something a lot more attractive, then sign me up for one of those guys as well.
Andy, I read an article last week by Jonathan Wilson, the daddy of football tactic writing, and he said 4-4-2 with a target man's coming back.
It should.
I agree.
There is something in this.
That's why I held on to it. I hold on to my beliefs until they become popular again.
It's like fashion. That's how I hold on to my old jeans and that. It comes round again.
Yeah. Who'd have thought that white skin tight Levi's would have become fashionable again? You did. Fair play to you.
You're the one that used to have the white denim jacket. Don't start.
No. You like your 80s stonewash. You're a double denimer to the day you die.
Aye, I know. See, listen. See if it coincides with winning Rangers, no problem to me. I'll walk about.
No, it's just, to me, the interesting thing about the article was that he was saying, and funnily enough, Russell Martin was one of the managers mentioned in it, that this idea there's only one way to play football just is not true. That
never has been true.
No, it never has been true. But the fact that football has been so deeply influenced by the Guardiola style that, as he put it, he went to see a non-league game and teams were passing it from the back.
But that's a very good point. But I think it kind of comes, hopefully, is related to the point I was trying to make. To play like Guardiola does with the teams that he has had available throughout his career
is one thing.
Makes perfect sense.
Yes,
because why wouldn't you use that arsenal that you have to that extent? When you don't have that, you have to do different things. So again, it's all about recruitment, and it's all about what Rangers are able to do and more intelligently, but maybe also what we're able to afford, and get a manager that fits. I'm not Andy. I'm open to all suggestions here in terms of style, but it has to fit the cloth that we are cutting at this minute in time. And with that, still the psychologist that gets them running through walls, which just hasn't happened enough for long periods.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Right then, folks, that will do us this week here on Heart and Hand. I'll be back next Monday after Rangers have taken on Motherwell at Ibrox. But Cammy will be here on Thursday to discuss the Clemont game and to look ahead to that match. If you want more coverage of everything that's been going on, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/Heart and Hand. My thanks to Paul and Mike in London, and my thanks to, first of all, Andy McGowan.
No problem, David. Hopefully it'll last for a while. This is me done this for about 4 managers with you.
Yeah. I was just thinking, actually, when it got announced, new manager, I thought, right, let's look at the press conference, the new manager press conference suit, make sure the shoes are cleaned and be ready to rock. It would be nice to have one now that was 2 or 3 years and lauded. I think, we can all discuss this, right? And Rangers fans, we all have our own opinions. At the end of the day, we just want to be quite good at football. I mean, is that too much to ask?
It would appear so at the moment.
It has been, it has been. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us, folks. We will be back next week. Until then, take care. Bye-bye, everyone. Please check out our sponsors NordVPN for the best in online security. It's the best VPN on the market, and you can try it risk-free now with a 30-day money-back guarantee by visiting nordvpn.com/heart and hand. That's nordvpn.com/heart and hand, and it's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee.